Namaste all of you. My name is Tarun Kumawat and I am working as an assistant professor in the Department of Education and Methodology in Jyoti Vidyapeeth Women's University, Ajmer Road, Jaipur. Today I am going to teach you the shell programming, and the session name is Shell Programming and Variables. Shell programming is the script writing of Unix operating system. Basically, first we want to know what is shell. Shell is the interface between kernel and the application tools. The commands given by the application tools is interpreted by the kernel through shell and given the commands to the kernel or hardware. So let's begin with the first slide. First slide is Unix shell scripts. Unix shell scripts are the text file that contains sequence of Unix command. Basically, the text file that contains the sequence of Unix command, different Unix command within a single file is known as shell script. Like high-level source files, a programmer creates shell scripts with a text editor. Here, text editor we are using is VI editor, and like C programming, we are creating shell script in a text editor. Third point is shell script do not have to be converted into machine language by a compiler. We do not have a compiler in shell script and there is no need to convert it into machine language. It is directly interpreted by the kernel, and this is because the Unix shell act as an interpreted when reading shell script. Okay, this point is telling us that Unix shell already act like an interpreter when reading the script file. There is no need to interpret Unix shell command and convert it into machine language by a compiler. Next slide is as an interpreter, read the statements one by one in a program file and immediately translate into the executable instruction and causes them to run. Unix shell interpret one by one commands in program file and immediately translate them into executable instruction and give them to execute or run. After creating a shell script, we are simply tell operating system that the file is program that can be executed. This is because Unix is Unix shell like an Unix shell works like an interpreter and simply tell the operating system that the program file that the file is a program that can be executed. The extension of the executed file is .sh, and this is accomplished by using the chmod command. Chmod commands give the permission to execute the program file and execute on the Unix shell program on Unix operating system. The Unix shell script. For the chmod command, tell the computers who is allowed to use the file, the owner of the file, the group of the file, and the other users of the file. Unix chmod command tells that what is the owner of the file, what is the group of the file, and what is the user that are allowed to use this file. Shell program runs quickly, then do the compile program because the shell must interpret each Unix command inside the executable script file before it is executed. We know that the shell acts like an interpreter that then it interprets one by one commands and inside the executable script file and give them to run or execute. The programming shell. There are several types of programming shell in Unix. Some of are listed below. The first is Bourne shell or SH shell. The first shell developed for Unix is Bourne shell, and second is Born Again shell. Born Again shell or Bash shell, written by the programmer of Free Software Foundation, open source shell for from GNU. GNU is General Union. GNU is a public community or open source community. The Born Again shell is written by the programmer of this community. Third is Korn shell or KSS shell, that is written by David Korn, superset of Born shell, not widely distributed. The Korn shell is not widely distributed. Superset means he is one of the founder or one of the programmer, one of the writer of the Born shell. C shell, CHS shell, written by Bill Joy, the author of VI. VI is a editor, shared much of the C language structure. C shell is basically shared much of the C languages structure. Terminal based C shell, TCHH. It is the enhanced version of the Berkeley Unix C shell, CHH shell. Next is shell programming. There are the different features of the Unix shell. Some of the listed below. First is shell variables. Shell variables are the variables that store the value of some token in memory that is used further use. Second is operators. The operators are arithmetic operators, logic operators, and relational operators. That are some operators which are used to programming. Third is logic structure. Logic structure is that like looping structure, decision making structure, and decision structures that are the logic like if else, for loop, while loop, and other loops, iteration, and case logic structure. In programming features of the Unix shells are programming features of the Unix shells are first is shell variable. Your scripts need to keep values in memory for later use. If we want to use the values in memory for later use, we are using shell variables. Data they are denoted by $sign, and we will use them later. Shell variables are the symbolic name that can access values stored in memory. We can use the variable that are stored in memory. Second is operators. Operators are the shell script support many operators, including those are performing mathematical operators. Mathematical operators like plus, minus, multiply, divide, modulus, remainder, and these are. And the logical operators are and, or, not, and ternary operators are like question mark. Different types of operators shell script is using. And logical structures shell script support sequential logic like if, then, else, and other for performing series of commands. Decision logics for branching them from one point to script to another point. Branching means jumping of one condition to another condition in a particular script. Looping logic. Looping logic is used for repeating a command several times like for loops, while loops, do while loops, for each loops. These are the looping logic that is used in shell programming. And case logic. Case logic is for choosing an action from several possible alternatives like case 1, case 2, case 3, and case 3, case 4, case 3, and other cases. At the end of this topic, variable. What is variable? Variables are the symbolic name that represents values stored in memory. These are the names to access the values that are stored in the memory. There are three types of variables discussed in this section. There are three types of. First is configuration variables, second environment variable, and third is shell variables. Configuration variables are used to store information about the setup of the operating system and do not change them. These are the variables that are used to set up the operating system first and we cannot change them. Second is environment variable. Environmental variable is the initial values that you can change as needed. Means we can change according to our need them environment variable. The shell operators are divided into three groups. First, defining, second, evaluating operators, and third, arithmetic operators, and third is redirecting or piping operators. First is defining and evaluating operators, second, arithmetic operators, and third, redirecting and piping operators. Linux shells. This is the chapter summary. The summary of the chapter is we are reading about. First is Linux shells are divided into Unix, Bourne, Con, and C shells. There are three. Basically, we can divide Linux shells into three parts. First is Unix Bourne, second Con shell, and C shell. Second point of summary is Unix keep three types of variable. Unix keep three types of variable. First is configuration variable that we cannot change. Second, environmental variable we can change as our need. And third is shell variables. Shell variables are the variables that is used to execute a command in shell script. The shell support numerous operators including many of performing arithmetics operations, second logical operators, and third point is and fourth and last point is the logic structure supported by the shells are sequential commands are executed one by one. Decision structure means if then else we have to make a decision. Looping or iterating. Looping means for loop, while loop, do while loop, for each loop, and case structure. Case structure are the structure that we are going to different cases and decide one case at a time. So this is a chapter summary of this session. We are hope you are fine and thank you very much for this chapter. Now I'm going to leave this chapter as thank you very much.